Hello everyone, Ember Power here, and welcome back to a new video. In this one, I'm going to be taking a look at the best new cards for GLC from Paldea Evolved. So, just as always, basically, for these new update videos, I'll be ranking each type and the new trainers. Of course, the ranking is a personal opinion, and the main point of the video, however, is to showcase the best new cards for each type. So, don't feel like this is a competitive ranking. This is just kind of like me saying, look, this type gets, these new cards, basically. Also, Squirvet is, of course, not a new card, but Squirvet asked to be in this video, and I said it would be okay, so Squirvet's in the video. So, starting things off, we've got grass types, which unfortunately I don't think they get that much better with Paldea Evolved. Bramblegast and Spidops are okay control options, I would say. Bramblegast does 80 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon's attacks cost 2 colors more. And then Spidops basically forces both players to shuffle both of their active Pokemon, which could be extremely annoying if you're up against a stage 2 focused deck. So you go up against this really annoying big tanky stage 2, or like a stage 1 Wailord or something. So that could be pretty annoying, but overall I don't think grass types are, they're not doing too well in GLC for this update. So next up we have fire types, and we got Oricorio and Paldea and Taurus. Admittedly, I think Oricorio is actually a really solid option. The ability Passionate Dance, once during a turn you may heal 20 damage from your active evolution Pokemon, is honestly really solid. Consistent healing throughout GLC seems to be pretty decent. And then Paldea and Taurus with the attack Raging Horns does 20 damage and then 10 more for each damage counter on Paldea and Taurus. So if you get something like a Fighting Fury Belt or a Cape of Toughness on there, or the new Big Charm if you're just playing in standard GLC, I still think it's a pretty decent card overall. Is it the best GLC option for fire types? Definitely not, but still playable, I would say, nonetheless. Next up is we have Colourless Types. I do like the Colourless Types that were revealed. The Dunsparce is pretty decent because you're probably already playing the Dunsparce to remove weakness. So having this option to evolve and then have an option to do Polarises and then shuffling the Dunsparce and all those energy back into the deck is pretty strong. The Pelipper is decent, I would say. It's kind of like, I don't want to say Pelipper is bad because I get that it does have really good applications, being able to either search your deck for support a card or retrieve one from the discard pile. But the problem I have with Pelipper, and honestly the problem I have with the Dunsparce and Slacking as well, is that Colourless Types are quite tight for space right now. There's not really a lot of room in a Colourless deck because there's already so many good draw options. There's stuff like Cincino, Bibarel, the Squirvet, of course. So yeah, I'm not so sure about Colourless Types with this set, but definitely better than Fire and Grass types. Next up is we have just a couple of Psychic types to look at, Tinkerton and Rabasca. Rabasca is translated into Spanish, that's why it looks so weird. But basically, Rabasca will allow you to retrieve any Pokemon from your discard pile and put it straight onto your bench, which is pretty decent if you just want to recover a stage 2 for the next turn. And then the Tinkerton has a decent ability, Gather Materials for GLC. Once in your turn, you may discard a card from your hand and then draw 3. And then Special Hammer does 90 damage, and if it has any special energy attached to it, it does 90 more. So, not the strongest Psychic type option for GLC. I know that GLC decks and Psychic types primarily focus on spread damage, but typically Tinkerton is hitting really hard. It will KO the vast majority of Stage 2 Pokemon, so definitely something worth bearing in mind, and that's why I thought Psychic types were, pretty decent in this set. So next up is we have water types. We've got Baxcalibur and Titan. Baxcalibur allows you to attach any number of water energy from your hand to your Pokemon, which is pretty scary because standard GLC for water types currently doesn't have Frostmoth or Blastoise. So this will basically be the return of Deluge to the format, or Deluge as it's called. But I still think it's a really, solid ability to have as well. It also means that in expanded GLC, if you can't afford Blastoise or you're having trouble getting hold of one in IRL, you could just turn to Baxcalibur. So that's really cool. There's also this Titan, which is, again, translated into Spanish. It does 80 damage, and if it has any special energy attached to it, it does 140 more. So this is basically like a slightly worse version of the Wailord from Silver Tempest, I would say. Although I do think, well, it's not doing more damage, but it is for 1 less energy. But it's still like another one of these really high HP tanky stage 1s to use. And because, of course, we don't have Blastoise, Frostmoth, or like that whole Wailord combo, I guess, then Titan could fulfill the role of that with Baxcalibur, although Wailord is still in standard technically, so you could play like Titan with Wailord and Baxcalibur in water decks. Also, something worth bearing in mind is that there is a Paldean Taurus, I believe, for both fighting water and fire. So there is that water Taurus that we looked at earlier from the fire types that will be in the set as well, presumably. So it's all really solid options, to be honest. So water should be getting better in standard GLC at least. Next up, we have lightning types. There is plenty to talk about here, actually. The Shinx has a pretty decent ability, and I believe the really good Shinx, the one that can evolve immediately, I'm pretty sure that's just limited to expanded. Then we have the Luxray with Vibrant Flash, which isn't the worst ability, to be honest. You can just throw him straight onto the bench. Now, of course, needing one Lightning, two Colors is kind of annoying to use, but if you have stuff like Twin Energy or Reverse Energy, it's pretty easy to power up. So definitely not the worst option in the world. Also got this Pinchurin, which does 20 damage, and I believe you have to flip a coin, and if heads it does Polarisis or something along those lines. And then the second attack does 100 damage for single energy, but you can only use that attack if you use the previous attack during your last turn. So it's like this awkward two-hit combo thing, but it's okay, to be honest. It's not like the worst Lightning Basic, not by a long while, at least in my opinion. We also have a Killer Wattrel that does 150 damage for 3 colors, and during your next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. So, assuming you have some other attacker that's pretty easy to charge up, especially something like a Zapdos, for example, and expanded, being able to use Jet Wing and then utilizing the free retreat to then switch into another Pokemon. And of course, 150 is really solid because it's knocking out the majority of stage 1s and basics, and as we see with Luxray, it can even KO other stage 2s. Next up, we have Dark types. So we've got Tyranitar, Hydreigon, and Weavile. Tyranitar is honestly a really cool one. Has two great attacks, in my opinion, Route and Dread Mountain, both of which I think are really, really solid in GLC. We also have Hydreigon, which is admittedly a bit worse because we don't really want to be playing this Hydreigon. In true GLC or expanded GLC, you want to be playing the Hydreigon from Darkness Ablaze, of course, but this Hydreigon, not the worst way to accelerate energy if you're looking for something in the meantime. You also have this Weavile that says, once during your turn, when this Pokemon moves from your bench to the active spot, you may switch one of your opponent's bench basic Pokemon to the active spot, which isn't the worst ability, to be honest. It's a bit tedious to use, and you'd have to like pair it up with something that can easily move around a bit, and like Tyranitar and Hydreigon, for example, have a high retreat cost. But still, Weavile could be a decent, boss option, especially, if we have to like KO an evolving basic using Slashing Claw. It's not the worst option, but I think it could be okay. Next up, we have Metal types, which, funny enough, I think Metal types were 6th place in the Scarlet Violet video. Orthworm is this amazing new basic, which has an ability, Nutritional Iron, that says if this Pokemon has 3 or more Metal Energy attached to it, it gets plus 100 HP. And then the attack, Shoot Through, for 4 colors, does 100 damage and 30 damage snipe to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So Orthworm, in combination with the Magnezone from Astral Radiance in standard GLC, and then of course the expanded Magnezone that allows you to attach as many Metal Energy as you want, will mean that Orthworm can very quickly have 230 HP, dishing out 100 damage and 30 snipe, which is absolutely bonkers, to be honest. This is a very, very good card. I definitely I wouldn't be surprised if this gets to see a whole bunch of play in Metal type decks. So yeah, thumbs up for Orthworm. Very, very solid. Unfortunately, it seems to be like the only Metal type Pokemon, I'd say. It seems to be good from Paldea Evolved, but hopefully if there's any more, then you can let me know. Next up, though, we've got Fighting types, which have a couple of nice new options. Gilmora can potentially prevent your opponent from taking a prize when they knock it out, which in GLC, when everything is worth 1 prize card, this could be the difference between victory and defeat, so that's pretty cool. Psych Out is also a really good setup attack. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned. During Pokemon Checkup, put 6 damage counters on that Pokemon instead of 1. So that's really solid until the opponent has to inevitably evolve or switch out, which is very, very strong. It's also worth mentioning there is actually a Gilmet, or a Gilmore, I think it's pronounced, the evolving basic that has Ascension as well. So they really just reprinted Glare and Weezing, but a fighting type effectively. But yeah, there is a Gilmet with Ascension, so you can evolve it straight into Gilmora going second. So that's a great little note if, when playing in Singleton GLC. We've also got this Whimsicash, which flip a coin for each fighting energy attached to this Pokemon. For each heads, discard the top card of your opponent's deck. Fighting type control decks, probably not a thing in GLC, but I just thought it was worth mentioning. It's also kind of like reminiscent of the Center Scorch that does see play in GLC as a mill deck, so if we ever get a really solid option for fighting types to accelerate energy, maybe Whimsicash can see a bunch of play. Next up, though, we have this Gargancle, which has the ability Blessed Salt. During Pokemon Checkup, heal 20 damage from each of your Pokemon, so just a really solid way of healing off damage, preventing spread. Also, it's pretty tanky, having 108 HP. Knockhammer is also decent, doing 130, then a little bit of mill, so that's okay. You also have access to like the Rock Chestplate from Scarlet Violet to take 30 less damage from attacks. So yeah, very, very tanky stage 2. I'd be interested in honestly experimenting with Gargancle because it just seems like a pretty solid stage 2 overall for fighting types. So next up, we're finally out of the Pokemon and onto the trainers. And in 4th place is all 4 new stadiums, which are all pretty decent to be honest. I think Arson Town is easily the best. Once during each player's turn, that player may search your deck for base Pokemon that doesn't have a Roblox and put it onto their bench. So it's giving both players a nest ball to work with every single turn, and maybe you don't want to do that for your opponent. But honestly, if you're the person that gets the value out of this first because you put it into play first, then it should be a decent trade-off, to be honest. And also, if remember the Tyranitar from earlier that had the attack route that did more damage for your opponent's bench Pokemon, in decks like that, we want to encourage our opponent to play more basics, so Arson Town makes a lot of sense. Then Snow Mountain of Disaster is exclusively for a water-type deck, and then Wilderness of Disaster is kind of like, well, I guess this is where Whimsicash comes in handy. This Caelid-looking artwork is for basic fighting type control decks, I guess. The retreat cost of each non-basic fighting type Pokemon is 1 color more, which is decent disruption. It could also cancel out stuff like Training Court, which is nice. So Wilderness of Disaster, definitely an okay card. Also got Lesson Studio, so if you're more focused on stage 1s than stage 2s, then each of your stage 1 evolution Pokemon do plus 10 damage. So really solid stadiums overall. I said studios overall. But stadiums overall, I would say. Arson Town clearly the big winner here, but yeah, definitely some nice options. Next up is we have some new supporters, Giacomo, Falconer, and Iono I've chosen. Giacomo I just think is really solid against Porygon in expanded GLC, and then Falconer's just really, really strong if you're playing a lot of stadiums, and if your opponent is also playing a lot of stadiums. We also got Iono, which is of course very, very strong disruption because there is no Marnie in standard. So being able to use this in combination with stuff like Judge is going to be really potent. Also, it's really decent in expanded GLC because it's another option to use alongside N, for example, and Marnie. So Iono is very, very strong in that regard. Next up for new items and tool cards, nearly at the end here, but we have Fighting Milk and Charm of Courage. Fighting Milk is essentially just a super potion, except you don't have to discard energy, you just have to be behind on prize cards, which I would say is something that's much easier to achieve in GLC because you never want to be removing energy unless you can just flood the board with it. So having access to even more healing. It also just means that we're a bit closer to having a true wall stall kind of focused GLC deck. I know there is 1 or 2 stall decks in GLC, but this could definitely help towards, big tanky basics that are hard to KO kind of archetypes. We also have this Charm of Courage. It says basic Pokemon gets plus 50 HP, which is just Cape of Toughness, essentially. So there's 2 copies of Cape of Toughness in your deck if you really like big basics. Think about dark decks in expanded GLC with Guzzlord, Hoopa, Spiritomb. They all play long amounts of basics, basically. So yeah, it's a lot of basic words, but yeah. Plus 50 HP, really solid. So definitely on the lookout for this. And lastly is the new energy. I did originally have Luminous Energy here as well, but Luminous Energy is a really, really niche card, so it ended up being kicked off the list in favor of Jet Energy and Reversal Energy. So Jet Energy is decent, of course, for just allowing you to switch in a Pokemon from the bench that you've been powering up for a few turns, which is nice. And then Reversal Energy is probably one of the biggest cards we've seen in a while for single price Pokemon. Essentially says if you're behind on price cards, this can be attached to an evolution Pokemon in GLC, and it provides any 3 energy at a time. So if you're just losing the game and then you promote a stage 2 that needs an attack cost of 3 energy, reverse energy will happily pay that attack cost. So very, very wild card. Obviously synergy with stuff like Titan, the new Luxray, but decent synergy with other stage 2s and stage 1s. But yeah, thanks for watching. It's been Emma Power. Let me know what you think down below. And yeah, thank you for watching.